Alright, the servers are officially down.
Wait, what?
Yeah. Oh, no way.
Are you sure?
1 second. Oh, social slayer population
Oh
0. No, no, no.
Oh,
It
what
takes
do
a
you
little
mean?
bit to load. Yeah, What do you mean
we
let me
can-
pick a playlist? I think this is it, boys.
I don't think it is.
Oh my
Come
god.
on, it's been an honor serving with you, lads.
The practice of removing games from digital libraries and stores is so common, it happens almost invisibly. Companies stop selling games and now sell revocable licenses, which allows them to flip a switch and turn off the thing you paid for. Some of my favorite games of all time are straight up unplayable in any format years after the fact because the publisher would rather revoke access to a niche community than give that community the tools they need to keep the game alive after their service is ended. Full disclosure, this video is partially a tribute to Ross's Stop Killing Games campaign, linked in the description, as well as the Ross's Game Dungeon YouTube channel, which has gone as far as documenting and reviewing games right before they shut down so that we have at least some archival of what the game was like before end of life. Not every game covered today is going to be completely lost or unplayable, as we would like to highlight several positive stories. Several mad lads out there are actively working to preserve and restore these games even as we write. Sometimes all it takes is a lot of time, and in some cases just one dude to bring a game back from the brink of death. Basically, if the barrier to entry to playing the game as intended is too difficult or so high you need to drop a rent payment on it, we are considering it for the list. But before we do that, we would like to state that the production of this video would not be possible without the help from our sponsor, War Thunder. We'd like to thank them for paying the editors and keeping the lights on. With that said, War Thunder is a free-to-play, large-scale multiplayer war simulator on the PC, Xbox, PlayStation, and even Mac if you're one of those people. Many players praised it for its true-to-life graphics and the fact that it incorporates all theaters of war into its matches, land, air, and sea. War Thunder's unique damage models also allows for location-based damage, which can impact the mobility and usability of the vehicle you're shooting at. For example, if you hit a gas tank, it will ignite, and this is true for all planes, boats, and tanks, leading to some real Sniper Elite-esque style kills that look and feel very satisfying. I'm a sucker for seeing things just go boom. Recently, they added a new Seek and Destroy update, which includes 2 new maps for intense aerial and naval battles, Mysterious Valley and the Bering Sea. Also included are a bunch of new ships, planes, helicopters, and of course tanks to play around with. The developers even implemented a few community suggested features. If any of this gameplay you're seeing on screen looks interesting to you, and you would also like to help out the channel by just playing a video game, consider using my link in the description to get War Thunder for free. When you do, as a special thank you, all new players and those who haven't played in half a year or more will receive everything you see on screen, unique skins, 100,000 in Silver Lions, and a full week of premium. With that said, we'd like to invite you to sit back, relax, turn down the lights, and enjoy our little production on games preservation. Roll the first clip.
Over the past few years, it's been more difficult than ever to be a fan of the Little Big Planet trilogy. Much of the game's appeal comes from its user-generated content, or rather, the levels you could create and publish to the LPP servers for other players to enjoy. As the series progressed, players' data was carried over from game to game, allowing you to keep whatever you created and collected in previous titles. However, this would prove to come at the cost of server security long-term. The age of the game, combined with the fact that they ran on a protocol called HTTP instead of HTTPS, left the servers vulnerable to exploitation by malicious modders, and nobody left with the knowledge on how to patch said exploits. These vulnerabilities caused serious issues for players in 2021 when hackers injected a script into LPP servers that caused thousands of levels to be uploaded every second, effectively overloading the servers. This DDoS attack would result in the permanent shutdown of PS3 servers for the game, though things would only get worse from here. Earlier this year, a player named Chilibath discovered an exploit with LPB's grief report system that could be used to suspend other players' PSN accounts.
He makes a list, right, by harding these people, and sooner or later does a false good grief report of some kind. I don't know if it's using modding or what, probably is, or some kind of exploit, and the report goes through and people are getting banned for it. And I'm not just talking Little Big Planet bans, I'm talking full-on PlayStation Network suspensions.
The disaster that followed in the wake of this exploit would come to be known as the Moderation Purge of 2024 in the Little Big Planet community, and would result in yet more server shutdowns for Sony to investigate the issue. Some still held out hope for the trilogy, which had been core to so many of their childhood memories. However, instead of a solution, players would receive this announcement instead. Since all of the custom levels carried out from game to game, the loss of the LPB servers put 16 years worth of user-generated content and millions of levels at risk of becoming lost media. This was a devastating blow, not only to the LPB community, which had been defined by the passion of sharing their creations, but also to anyone who happened to be a little sentimental about the silly levels they made as a kid. Little Big Planet is a series that deserved more, but the only hope at the end of the story is the fact that many levels were preemptively downloaded and archived, as well as the custom servers that keep the community on life supports through jailbroken consoles and emulators. What remains is a cautionary tale of what happens when mismanaged server security and bad actors mix.
Driver San Francisco seems like it could have been a cool game if only Ubisoft hadn't delisted it from digital stores in 2016. In it, you play as Driver series protagonist John Tanner, an undercover super cop who ends up in a super cop coma after his pursuit of a recurring villain named Jericho ends in a devastating crash. Most of the game that follows takes place inside of the coma dream that ensues, wherein Tanner discovers that he now has the ability to possess his fellow motorists, taking over their body and vehicle. What might seem like a simple gimmick on the surface really shines when you possess a driver with a passenger in their car, as Driver San Francisco contains 150 unique passenger NPCs with their own reactions and sub-stories that update from chapter to chapter. Some of these passengers will even carry out conversations with the driver whom Tanner has possessed, prompting the player to strategically select dialogue which will not raise suspicion. Another thing that makes the game special is its framing as a coma dream, a premise which is steeped in dramatic irony since the player knows that this is all in John Tanner's head, but the character hasn't figured it out yet. This allows for the real world and the coma world to clash in interesting ways, with the dream deteriorating as Tanner gets closer to connecting the dots. An example of this is when the shift power is upgraded to its maximum potential, it allows the player to zoom all the way out and view the entire city when selecting a driver to possess, only for this maximum zoom level to also be accompanied by the appearance of an EKG line as well as an audible heart rate monitor. If you'd like to learn more about Driver San Francisco's unique gameplay, we recommend this video by Nick Robinson, which includes a breakdown of the mission Frozen, a level that creates a metaphor for a cardiac arrest Tanner is suffering in the real world through the experimental mechanic of having all of the traffic on the road freeze in place. That, and he manages to purchase the game through a gray market reseller with, no cap, an actual Subway gift card, which is a true gamer moment if I've ever seen one. Unfortunately, as fascinating as all of this seems, this installment of the Driver franchise remained on digital store shelves for less time than it spent in development. Ubisoft's dead silence as to why the game was delisted has led some to speculate that it must have something to do with a licensing conflict, either with the music or vehicles included in the game. A fate that, sadly, befalls most racing games. At the end of the day, a dedicated group of developers took a risk on a driving game mechanic that hadn't really been done before, painstakingly created the Drive series' largest driving environment with over 200 miles of road, wrote all of this dialogue that the player might not even hear for the shift mechanic, and for what? Just to have the whole thing torn down by Ubisoft, who apparently can't be bothered to do the bare minimum to keep their products live or respect the artistic work put forward by its developers.
For all of its flaws, Overwatch 1 was an amazing game that is definitely something worth remembering. Sure, Overwatch 2 has taken its place, but it should be noted that Overwatch 2 is a different game. Instead of 6v6, it's 5v5. The maps available to play in some cases are completely different, and most importantly, Overwatch 2 just had a different vibe than the original from 2016. We don't understand why there is a trend of making a sequel to an extremely popular game only to make it completely unplayable after an overhaul. The same fate befell Counter-Strike Global Offensive. Once considered to be one of the most popular games of all time, Valve released an update/next-gen upgrade called Counter-Strike 2. which replaced your Counter-Strike Global Offensive game on your Steam library. Unlike Overwatch 1, it is still technically possible to play Counter-Strike Global Offensive if you revert Counter-Strike 2 to an older version using the Steam properties, but isn't it weird that they made this new game, yoinked their old game out of your Steam library, and just kinda inserted this one into its place? Why not have the games be completely separate so people who want to play the old version can, similar to how you can still play Team Fortress Classic and Counter-Strike Classic? It's almost as if these publishers would rather destroy a piece of art in an attempt to push you towards the cool new thing. I mean, why would you want to enjoy it if they are not actively selling it?
Video Horror Society, abbreviated to VHS, was a free-to-play Dead by Daylight-inspired indie game created by Hellbent Games, a company who has not tweeted anything since May of 2024, and for some reason, they also worked on a lot of LEGO Ninjago games. When VHS initially came out, there were a lot of players, including myself, that hoped it could provide some sort of competition to Dead by Daylight. In fact, VHS was basically the Anakin Skywalker of the asymmetrical horror community. Many DBD fans were extremely jaded with where Dead by Daylight was going, and a very good chunk of them quickly migrated to VHS, hoping that it would kill Dead by Daylight. Not everyone was that toxic, but it wasn't that far off. The gameplay focused on 4 teens either hiding, running, or fighting the killer. This focus on fighting back would lead to many balancing woes. At first, the killers would be able to stomp new players, but once you had a team of people that knew what they were doing, especially against a new killer, it would turn into a stunfest real fast. This led to a new issue where new killers were often dropping the game entirely due to frustrating and stressful gameplay, while making games take a while to find for those that chose to stuck it out. And then, let's say you're a new survivor. When you finally found your first game, it would likely be a veteran killer with over 100 hours in the game. Unfortunately, the game didn't just suffer from a seriously bad matchmaking problem, but also underwent a heap of drama before its eventual closure, which I think likely contributed to why people were off-put by this title near the end. Especially with the aptly named Rewinder program, which appears to be kinda like the Fog Whisperer program that Dead by Daylight has, where creators and the developers of this game can communicate both for advertising purposes as well as giving out codes for the game itself. A newer developer working for Hellbent, going under the pseudonym of Harper, was leaking upcoming content and apparently employee information.
And after this person gained so much trust, they suddenly went rogue. They proceeded to create a small Discord group with other mods and leak entire, and I mean entire, heaps of content. This included upcoming monsters, maps, items, cosmetics, balance changes, and much more. Even more disturbing, they leaked actual sensitive Hellbent employee information. This included full names, addresses, numbers, and more.
You have creators that represent this company and bear this logo and this special title and have actual communication with the developers, like going around calling people gay and during stream. And even as it spilled out onto Twitter and other community spaces, the team refused to handle it because they just didn't care for behavior happening behind the scenes, no matter how vile that behavior actually was. It gets even scummier when the Rewinder Lily Pie, which we played a clip from earlier, had designed an outfit for the game to be like a special creator cosmetic, kind of like the ones that streamers were given back when Dead by Daylight was getting started. These were cosmetics to let other people know that they were playing with a legitimate creator and for them to have their own fun stuff to do with their community. Lily Pie left the program before the outfit was implemented. Instead of asking permission or compensating Lily for her design that she submitted, they implemented her work and sold it as a cosmetic on the cash shop anyway.
Instead of scrapping the cosmetic, or at minimum asking for my consent to use it, they implemented it into the game anyways for purchase with real money. I did the job of a concept artist, had my concept watered down, and got nothing, not even credit. I publicly posted to confront the devs, in which they responded that they were indeed in the wrong and that I should have been asked first.
Hellbent as a company went from a group of 49 employees to just 4, and it's likely due to a number of reasons, but on the face of it, it seems like they just didn't know how to manage a community. At first, they had a great community manager and all the avenues for possible great curated feedback was open, but over time, these lines of communications were shut down intentionally by the developer. What was a pretty cool game with a lot of potential was cut short due to a reliance on a central server with zero preparation for an end-of-development build. Instead, it shut down similar to Loadout, Super Monday Night Combat, and recently joining them, Gundam Evolution. It just sucks because whenever a project like this fails, not only are a lot of people now just without a job, but all the hard work they poured their lives, hearts, and souls into for potentially years on end is now just kind of unceremoniously destroyed. Only somewhat remembered in memorandums and videos like this.
Spec Ops: The Line was a subversive game for its time, beginning development in 2007, which was the same year Modern Warfare 2 was released. What set this game apart from other 7th generation console shooters was its frank and unflinching look at the horrors of war, and the toll it takes on the mental health of those who survived. While Modern Warfare was content to let you drop A-bombs from the AC-130, Spec Ops forces you to confront the consequences of your actions face-to-face with the civilian victims of your aerial assault. Not only is this making a statement about accountability in war, but it's also a criticism of the US government, which used the same chemical weapon in Iraq just a few years prior to the game's development. Spec Ops: The Line is also a game covered in Part 1 of TCR's Disturbing Games iceberg, before it was unlisted by Steam and other digital stores earlier this year, effectively limiting access to the game to the secondhand market. The reason for the game's removal is apparently due to the expiry of licenses for in-game music, specifically a cover of the Star Spangled Banner by Jimi Hendrix, which plays on the game's title screen over an image of a tattered and inverted American flag. This iconic cover was performed at Woodstock in 1969, and utilizes a technique which allows Hendrix's guitar to mimic the sounds of bombs and gunfire, as well as wailing screens and sirens to protest the Vietnam War. Simply replacing the song with something else would compromise the statement being made with its inclusion, and the result would be an inferior piece of art. This especially feels like a slap in the face of game preservation, because movies don't have to deal with the same issues surrounding license expiry, with other war-protesting pieces of media, such as Apocalypse Now, which also inspired Spec Ops: The Line, getting to enjoy robust licensed soundtracks decades after release.
Street Fighter Online Mouse Generation is one of the most bizarre yet interesting games that come out of the Street Fighter franchise. This was a Japan-exclusive PC fighting game released in 2008 by Deleto, a subsidiary of Capcom. As the name suggests, the characters are completely controlled by a mouse, rather than a traditional controller or fight stick. One of the most interesting details about this game is its design, which consists of 3D models on a 2D plane. Additionally, these characters have the appearance of action figures, which was done in association with and to help promote Revotech, a line of action figures owned by a Japanese toy company, Kyoto. Some figures had customizable parts for heads, arms, chests, and legs, which would give characters new abilities and specials. Some of these parts were actually sold in sets obtainable via game currency or microtransactions. One of these sets kinda leads us into another rabbit hole. An interesting thing about this game, which would be the actual roster. Despite Street Fighter being in the game's title, only 5 of the game's 20 characters actually hail from that franchise: Ryu, Chun-Li, Ken, Zangief, and Guile. 2 of them are from a game called Rival Schools, which is in a shared universe with Street Fighter, and they'd be contributing the characters Batsu and Akira. The latter would actually become a playable guest character over a decade later in Street Fighter V. Shin is the only new, all-original character in the game. Despite this game not being a part of the mainline series, Shin is the overall first South Korean character and first Taekwondo practitioner in the Street Fighter franchise. The roster for this Street Fighter game even gets stranger, as it has characters from Cyborg 009, Gavin from Space Sheriff Gavin, Jonas Krauser 2 from Detroit Metal City, and characters from Jin Young's novels. However, if I were to tell you that that's the most weird thing this game does with Street Fighter's roster, I'd be a liar. The most unusual, eyebrow-raising, insane thing that this game is doing, as it also included Barack Hussein Obama as a playable character. I'm not kidding. In this game, he's simply referred to as the President. and was actually a special costume for Ryu that was released for Valentine's Day for some reason. Street Fighter Online Mouse Generation lasted a little under a year, as it would be shut down August 31st, 2009. The cause for its shutdown was simply stated to be due to various reasons, with no further explanations, specifics, or any plans being made to make this game playable in an offline format. While it wasn't as widely known or beloved as some other Street Fighter games, there were likely people who worked on Mouse Generation longer than it was actually playable. Mouse Generation did bring a dash of uniqueness to the franchise, with characters like Barack Obama and anime. Fighting games are also one of the more difficult genres to get into. In fact, I wasn't even able to get into it after hundreds of hours of practice and training with the legendary Broly Legs himself. It's probably the genre that requires the most time investment for anybody to get into, which is what makes it ultimately satisfying when everything eventually does click. So, having a fighting game entirely playable with the mouse could potentially be an avenue for newer players to get into, or at the very least, a interesting novelty to go back to in this current day. Unfortunately, we live in the wrong timeline, where people worked on this game longer than it was available to play.
Fable 3 is still currently playable on the Xbox through backwards compatibility. Plus, finding a copy for the 360, should you own that system still, is not exactly hard. Fable 3 also came on the PC and even featured an additional hard mode, making it the most complete edition of the game. The only problem with that is Fable 3 depended on games for Windows Live to function. If you had not already bought the game through a service or own a physical disc, you cannot play Fable 3 on the PC. Even so, without games for Windows Live, you also cannot activate DLC or play online, so part of the game is lost, and most of it is out of reach for most players, especially since it does not play nice on modern operating systems either. Games for Windows Live was a service Microsoft used for a lot of PC games back in the 2000s and early 2010s. When the service shut down, it made a lot of PC games inaccessible, affecting games like Fallout 3. Games for Windows has always been a dog crap service that acted like an additional layer that ran under the game, while offering no real benefit for PC players while also imposing a lot of restrictions. Fable 3 on the PC is different from the current version that you can find on Xbox. Its content seemingly lost for most players who don't even remember the difference to begin with. It's sad that the main reason why this game cannot be played is entirely due to third-party always online applications that killed so many others in the past.
Spellbreak was a battle royale-style third-person shooter developed by Proletariat, which used gauntlets that fire magical spells instead of guns. The game also contained both RPG and roguelike elements, with a class system that augmented spells of your chosen element, as well as devastating spell combinations and movement abilities that seemed like they would have been satisfying to execute. Spellbreak had solid, albeit short-lived success on release, climbing to 5 million players in the first month, and even becoming one of the most watched games on Twitch for a time. Unfortunately, however, in the summer of 2022, it was announced that Proletariat had been acquired by Blizzard Games, and that they would be integrated into the content pipeline for World of Warcraft. The timing of this acquisition just so happened to coincide with the workplace harassment controversy surrounding Blizzard Games and their former CEO, the breast milk burglarizer himself, Bobby Kotick. Like, just in case you didn't know, at the same place they developed legendary games like Overwatch, StarCraft, and World of Warcraft, there were dudes crawling around on their hands and knees stealing breast milk from fellow employees. Like, how does that even happen? Around this same time, QA employees from Raven Software would vote to unionize and succeeded despite attempts from the anti-union management at Activision to discourage workers from voting in favor of the union. Considering the many walkouts and mistreatment of workers by Activision Blizzard, this move is one of those rare W's for workers' rights. Eventually, the Spellbreak servers were shut down on January 10th of 2023, though the developers would upload a community client to itch.io. Full disclosure, you can still play Spellbreak despite it being an unsupported battle royale. After Proletariat was acquired by Activision, they put together this package, along with some rules, about how it can be used by the community so they could keep playing the game they had supported all this time. We gotta stress that this is the good ending that most online games never get to see. More often than not, publishers and developers will make something cool without any idea of how to preserve it longer than its service period, which makes this a pretty special exception to the rule. Hopefully, the former developers of Proletariat are doing okay at Blizzard, and that the rights of people who work on video games will continue to improve.
So, what do you get when you mix the high-impact, fast-paced, smash-mouth, electrifying worlds of professional wrestling and fighting games with the rather cartoonish world of battle royales? You get Rumbleverse. Developed by Iron Galaxy and published by Epic Games, Rumbleverse was a free-to-play brawler battle royale released on August 11, 2022. The game supported cross-progression and cross-play across all available platforms. Instead of having a roster of distinct characters with different playstyles, Rumbleverse allows the player to create their own character, only being able to modify them cosmetically. You could either queue up solo or as a duo. A match would begin with a great number of players, 40 to be exact, whom are all loaded into a cannon, shot into the air, and dropped down to land in Capital City, where the mayhem will then begin. Unlike most other battle royales, the player is not armed with firearms, and the combat is centered around melee attacks. Punching, kicking, Irish whipping, elbow dropping, suplexing, dropkicking are among the default moves instantly available to the player. You can expand your arsenal by an additional 2 moves upon finding magazines and reading them. Some of these special moves will look very familiar to fighting game fans. The Shoryuken, E Honda's 100-hand slap, Zangief's spinning lariat, dive kicks, and of course plenty of familiar wrestling moves. The chokeslam, the spear, the giant swing, the super kick, and of course the internet's favorite, some of the aforementioned special moves and elbow drops can hit a little harder due to the game's height damage mechanic, wherein the higher you perform a move, the more damage it'll deal. There is one final move that everyone has access to, but it requires you to fill up your superstar meter, which you can do by dishing out damage, taking damage, and/or collecting stars. Once you do so, you can enter superstar mode and unleash a devastating super move, an insane power bomb with so much spinning and hang time, it'll make old Zangief proud. You can also save your full superstar meter to get a comeback when you get KO'd. While there are no firearms, there were definitely weapons. There were those that you would expect as such, like steel chairs and baseball bats, and then there were those that were a little more out there, like the starfish. There were even consumables such as protein powder pods, which you can consume to increase your damage, health, and/or stamina, a mussel shake, which will give you star power, and food such as chicken, nachos, and the popcorn party, which can replenish your health. Finally, when it comes to all the aforementioned items, they can be thrown at opponents to damage them, some items coming off as a little bit more disrespectful than others. As time went on, Rumbleverse would get a battle pass and collections with unique cosmetics, new modes that allowed for trios and quad teams, some new magazines with new moves, a snowball fight holiday event, and an extension to the Capital City map called Low Kiki Island. After a 6-month run, on February 28, 2023, Rumbleverse's servers were completely shut down following an announcement from Iron Galaxy the previous month. A farewell video was even released the day of, thanking all the players for their support. Additionally, all in-game purchases for Rumbleverse were refunded to players. While the reason for the shutdown was never openly stated, many point the finger at marketing issues and a low player count. The latter I could somewhat personally attest to, as I remember playing a great number of matches prior to the shutdown announcement where I'd be spending a longer time in the waiting lobby than usual. The match following said long wait would usually be filled with like 3 to 5 bots, which as I'm sure you know in these games are pretty easy to KO. Rumbleverse was quite unique amongst other prominent battle royales, but that uniqueness may have been something of a detriment, hindering its potential to compete with the likes of Fortnite, Apex Legends, and others.
The developer TellTale is a Belgium team consisting of 2 people, Arya Harvey and Michael Salmon. As a team, they always leaned into the artistic side of games, as opposed to its technical and mechanics-focused side. Over the years, they have consistently created games that challenge what a game can be. For example, after the creation of World of Warcraft, they created Endless Forest, a MMO with no chat or combat where you play as these deer people with human faces, communicating entirely through emotes. It's a cool concept to make an MMO that has no combat with a focus on communication without a chat box, but in practice, it's not necessarily the most engaging experience. That said, I really don't think engagement is entirely their goal. A common theme across all their games is the amount of near ambient silence you'll be left in with nothing to do but look around and think. It's a self-reflective experience where the game asks you questions and throws visuals and text, but it's up to you to take it and decide what it ultimately means. This slow burn approach remains true whether you're talking about their most recent game, Sunset from 2015, The Graveyard, or in this case, the game we're spotlighting today, The Path. In The Path, you play as one of 6 girls inspired by the story of Little Red Riding Hood, whose ages range from 9 to 19. Much like the story they take inspiration from, you're intended to stray away from the path and wander into the woods, eventually tackling an age-appropriate wolf. Sometimes this wolf is represented in the form of an older male, a monster in the woods, or a boyfriend with bad habits. All of these wolves are supposed to represent milestones that a girl of that age might encounter. Most of the gameplay involves walking aimlessly around looking for landmarks and collectibles, and hidden events that sometimes adds greater context to the character you're playing as. A lot of the love that I currently have for this game and this development team actually came from the YouTuber Izzy Is and their retrospective on the series, which kind of drug this game from the memory hole of my life and put it back into the forefront. In fact, it was because of their videos that we were able to find the remains of some of their old websites and blogs, which is half functional, but you can still find posts made by these characters of this game, which yet gives you greater context. It's the type of thing that someone like MatPat would have loved if he made videos all the way back in 2009. The only problem with The Path is that it's slowly falling apart. On October 31st, 2022, then Tale of Tales tweeted out that The Path is discounted for Halloween. Please play it before Microsoft kills it. Then further clarified, with every update, things stop working. The Path already broke a few years ago after a Windows update, but that time we were able to fix it. Next time, we might not be so lucky. It's old software with an obsolete game engine. The Path uses Quest 3D, which is an extremely old piece of hardware that has not been supported for some time now. I mean, wow, using the Wayback Machine, we can look at the specs that it required. Even at the time, it wasn't a popular engine, which costed nearly $3,000 just to use. As a result, there are not many tools that can clearly rip and data mine the Path. And with each subsequent Windows update, more and more of it breaks, causing the unique AI systems or special flag events to not trigger properly. Even if you go to the Steam community, it's a lot of people trying to figure out how to make it function beyond technical decay. The Path is a beautiful game that didn't get the love it deserved when it first released, and now the literal passage of time is going to make this niche but respected title go the way of the dodo. Unless someone from the community can figure out how to preserve this, there's not really much to be done. The developer is clearly not to blame as they don't want to see this go, but like I said, at this point, saving it might be out of their control. Even from the beginning, these people started as artists and not technicians. So, yeah, see if you can play it. You might not be able to forever.
Godzilla for the PS4 was a love letter to the classic movies. While it's not a great fighting game, and the single-player elements at the time of release were considered subpar,
Godzilla barely has any substantial modes. There's only 2 real modes offline. God of Destruction and King of Kaiju. God of Destruction mode, the main mode of play, has you as Godzilla selecting between 10 missions where your sole objective is to destroy energy generators. You do this for level 1. You do this for level 2. You do it for level 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There's no variation. There's no alternate objectives. You just destroy the generators the entire game. It is enough to drive you mad.
Godzilla for the PS4 brought the most detailed version of the Godzilla IP in a video game, bringing to life the rubber suits that made many fans. Godzilla PS4, despite being made for something as recent as the PS4, is almost unattainable for most people. Once again, the licenses expired and this title was delisted. Since this delisting was done on the down low, no one had any warning before this game was completely removed in 2017. This would have been fine, but Godzilla also had a limited physical release that did not really do all that well, considering the gravity of the property the publisher was working with, and less than stellar gameplay that could have used more time to cook. Not many units were printed, and those that were pretty much went to collectors. Upon being delisted, the price of Godzilla's physical copies went up, going from around $15 to $70 to $80. As of today, the cheapest we could find the game was on Amazon for nearly $600, or about half a rent deposit. As for the servers, from what we could find, if you manage to drop a car payment on the game and have a PS Plus account, in theory you could play online with the other people that still have it. It's unlikely these servers will remain up for much longer, even if they're still around. Without further preservation, our best bet for playing this game in the future is a PS4 emulator, which as of now is not where it needs to be for that.
The Crew is a game that had a lot of potential up until Ubisoft pulled the plug and made it unplayable even for owners of a physical copy. Boasting the second largest driving game world ever created, what made The Crew so special was the ability to drive from coast to coast across the entire continental United States. While scaled down and overly reliant on repeating textures at times, the map simulates the experience of a cross-country road trip complete with geographical features, major cities, and landmarks. Not only is the selection of drivable terrains diverse and with a pleasing amount of attention to detail, but you can also visit famous American landmarks and read facts and statistics about them. If you wanted to learn more about this lovingly crafted, and dare I say, patriotic game world, then we recommend this video from Ross's Game Dungeon, whose solitary fight to keep games alive post-publisher support was a source of inspiration for this very video. Unfortunately for The Crew, it was an online-only game that relied on a central server for basic functions like logging in and storing player information. While the online feature was utilized to allow other players to appear while you explored the open world, Ubisoft could have just as easily patched the game to support offline play. Instead, the game lived on borrowed time until the plug was pulled last March, effectively making a product that millions of gamers had paid for now worthless. Even if you have a physical disc, you can't play The Crew without signing into a server that was already shut down. While it could be argued that the end-user license agreement entitles Ubisoft to take our games away, you could also go the other way and say that it's a breach of consumer protection since The Crew was sold under a perpetual license. The fact that this is a legal gray area which has gone unchallenged for so long is what makes companies like Ubisoft feel like they can act with impunity. You could even go as far as to say that Ubisoft in particular has been explicitly brazen with its contempt for its own users wanting to enjoy the things they buy. In most instances of a game sunsetting, you are still able to download the game's data after the fact, which can be very helpful when trying to revive the game post-mortem. In an attempt to combat this possibility, Ubisoft has been revoking keys, making the data that you used to store on your computer even harder to access.
You know, once upon a time, a company dropping support didn't mean the game stopped working. All it meant was they dropped support. You had to troubleshoot it yourself. Boy, I'd love to go back to that model.
This is beyond neglecting the art they created for short-sighted goals like DRM. Ubisoft, in their infinite wisdom, is now revoking ownership, as if you never owned the game or the very data you paid for in the hopes that it remains dead and buried. But I mean, what else can be said about the company that openly stated that gamers need to get comfortable not owning their games anymore?
Jin Doji Wong was a Chinese fighting game developed by Jade Studios and published by Tencent Games exclusively for PCs. The game was also known as King of Combat and the King of Dazzling Fighters. Keep those two names in the back of your head, we'll circle back to them later. Jin Doji Wong never saw a full-on release, but instead spent its entire run in beta, with the first build being released in 2011 via digital download from Tencent's game platform, and was exclusive to Chinese servers. This build launched with 5 playable characters, and every 1 to 2 months new updates would be released, adding new characters, costumes, modes, and character balancing. The game was also in a closed beta phase, requiring the usage of a code for access. You can play 1v1 or 3v3 matches. In the latter, there is no tag mechanic. Instead, you select the order in which you play your characters. You can also perform short hops, evasive rolls, enter max mode, where you get a damage boost, and you can perform enhanced super moves. If all of this doesn't sound suspiciously familiar to you, well, let's bring back those two other names for Jindoji Wong mentioned earlier. Do either of these remind you of another fighting game franchise? No? I'll give you a hint. Take the dazzling out of this name. Yep. Jindoji Wong was basically a Chinese King of Fighters knockoff. This is further evident by some of the character designs. One of the main protagonists, named Yin, is basically Kyo Kusanagi from King of Fighters, just with a lot of red. Hell, if you look at his alternate costume, they weren't even trying to hide it. Then there's a character like Kaoru Kuraki, the pink-haired, incredibly radiant, super stylish J-pop star. The King of Fighters has one of those too. Her name's Athena. There are also some characters that clearly take inspiration from elsewhere. Quite surprisingly, one of said characters is Panda, who, despite there being a Tekken character by that very same name who is also a panda bear, surprise, this character is quite obviously a knockoff of Po from Kung Fu Panda, which at the time was either en route to or had already released its second film. Once again, just like the Yin example, they were not trying to hide it, because if you go and you watch Panda's trailer, which you can on YouTube, what's playing in the background? A cover of the 1974 classic disco hit Kung Fu Fighting, which appeared on the first Kung Fu Panda soundtrack. Also, like most fighting games, there is even the Bruce Lee clone character named Long. The funny thing about this character is that he is not a Bruce Lee clone in the same matter as other fighting game characters like Liu Kang, Fei Long, Martial Law, and Kim Dragon, bonus points if you remember him, but Long is a Bruce Lee clone in storyline. Literally, his backstory is he was cloned from Bruce Lee's DNA. I'm not kidding. Getting back to the fact that Jindoji Wong is basically a KOF mockbuster, SNK, the creators of KOF, actually had a deal with Tencent, part of which came in the form of Jindoji Wong getting two guest characters, Benimaru Nikaido from King of Fighters, and Terry Bogard from Fatal Fury and King of Fighters. These two characters would be added to the game in August 2013, but roughly 2 years later, they would be removed following a shift in the deal, which involved a dismantling and restructuring plan for Jade Studio, which was enacted by Tencent. The developers had planned to reobtain the rights to the characters and add them back into the game later down the line, but unfortunately, that never happened. Jindoji Wong did have its differences from KOF, including a different input for performing throws, some unique single-player modes such as a beat-em-up mode, and the game's art style consisting of 3D models. Around the time Jindoji Wong's first beta came out, the premier KOF game was KOF 13, a game that continues to be celebrated even to this day for its art style. KOF 13 had been released for the PS3 and Xbox 360 in 2011, and also at that time, video game consoles were still pretty much banned in China. The ban of the sale of consoles in China was enacted in the year 2000 and lasted until 2015. This is all to say that the game, being a KOF knockoff, was very much done by design, as it was developed to give Chinese players their own KOF game they could play at home in the midst of the console ban. After the aforementioned restructuring plan that was enacted by Tencent, there were plans for a newly assembled Jade Studios to continue production on Jindoji Wong. This all mysteriously came to a close sometime around 2020, as the official website was shut down and the game had been taken off of Tencent's game platform with next to no explanation as to why. Even the community site kingofcombat.com, which provided all the sources and downloads to enable people outside of China to play the game, is also gone and currently directs you to the official website of Motherland, a collective of artists out of Nigeria who have described themselves as more of a cult than a club. And it probably won't shock you, this collective has nothing to do with Jindoji Wong. Unlike most knockoff products that are often mocked and laughed at, Jindoji Wong actually had quite a dedicated following, and not just in China, but worldwide. Seeing that the official website is the only way to obtain a code for downloading the game, it's safe to say that this one is lost. Even those players that still have the game's data are unable to play it, because this is one of those games that required an internet connection, not just for online play, but simply for the game to run. and the servers have been shut down, so yeah.
Telltale's The Walking Dead was the first game to make me see that games can be genuine art and that these experiences can be so powerful that can drive you to tears and make you reflect on your own life. So when Telltale was shut down in 2018 suddenly and without warning to both the fans and developers alike, it came as a shock. Telltale really had their own unique style that you could really not get any other place. Games like Sam & Max, Tales from the Borderlands, and Telltale's Poker Night really showcase the studio's witty writing style, and it kinda sucks because Telltale's Poker Night can no longer be obtained. The game that brought Brock Sampson, Ash Williams, and GLaDOS all into the same room to play a few rounds of poker was shut down due to not renewing their licenses following the closure of the studio in 2018. As a result of not being able to play Poker Night anymore, the special TF2 skins you once were able to obtain by getting specific achievements can no longer be obtained. The closure of Telltale also meant that Strong Bad's Cool Game for Attractive People and Minecraft Story Mode would eventually be delisted again due to licensing. Can we mention how freaking weird it is that Minecraft Story Mode, a game that once could be played on the Netflix video player, is basically lost media for anyone that had not previously bought it. As for Strong Bad's Cool Game for Attractive People, it was pulled down in 2023 due to failure to renew licenses. As a result, no one can play it anymore. While it's not really the same thing as playing it for yourself, at least there are plenty of YouTube videos not only archiving many of the interactions, but can give you an idea of what the games might have been like if you missed the opportunity to buy and play it when it was still listed on the store.
Created for the 35th anniversary of Super Mario Bros., Super Mario Bros. 35 was a battle royale similar to Tetris 99, except here you are playing the classic platformer against 35 others. Every enemy you and the other players kill will be sent to other games, which quickly compounds on itself to an unplayable mess. Even so, many people enjoy this take on the battle royale genre, even if it's a little undercooked and most people chose to play on the same map or two. The only problem is that Nintendo's Super Mario Bros. 35 was never meant to be a legit game, but rather a promotional event for Super Mario 3D All-Stars, to which it was successful in that endeavor. Not successful enough for Nintendo to keep the game alive, but successful enough to sell and move units. That's right, for 1 year and 1 year only, players were allowed to play this extremely well-received Mario-themed battle royale. After that, the plug was pulled and you're out of luck. Given more development time and room to grow, Super Mario Bros. 35 could have been a trendsetter. In fact, the YouTuber Inferno Plus made his own version of the concept a whole year before Nintendo released the game. In Inferno Plus's version, instead of sending enemies to attack other players, it was a speed run to the end. The game even ran right from the browser. The only problem is, it only survived 2 weeks after a massive burst in players. Despite a conservative effort to completely redo all the graphics and make the game copyright compliant, Nintendo did not care and simply wanted the game taken down.
Around lunchtime on Tuesday, I got another call from Mr. Lawboy and was told that despite all the work I had done, I was still infringing on their copyright. Now, I asked for more details, like multiple times, and was just given some really non-answers, more or less. But I kind of guessed that it's either the level design or general gameplay mechanics, but it's hard to say either way. And the reality is, the fact that they contacted me a second time, the fact that they actually bothered to do so, means that they are out for blood. They don't want this game to exist because, simply put, it's competition for Mario Maker 2. That's the reason it had to die. Rest in peace, Infringio.
Inferno Plus makes bonkers content like turning Dark Souls into Halo, so if anything, his adventure into copyright infringement led me to discovering a new creator who I still watch to this day. After everything is said and done, however, 2 great games that remained successful and played until its forced closure by Nintendo are now gone. There's something that just makes me feel so hollow, having to admit that even success is not enough to save the art that we care about. It feels like Nintendo as a company would rather destroy their own work rather than let you play it when they are not actively selling it. And here I thought that copyright was here to protect creative works.
For many of the games on our list, emulation has served as a final form of life support to prevent these works of art from becoming inaccessible or lost media. Regardless of what your opinion on emulation may be, is the most ethical use case. And frankly, if you're already interested enough in archival and preservation to make it this far into the video, you're probably the type to see some value in emulation. This is why PlayStation 2 titles are at a particular risk. While some programs like the open source PCSX2 are great at what they do, there exists a bottleneck in PS2 emulation that makes it an imperfect solution. Without going too in-depth, the PS2 runs off something called the Emotion Engine Multiprocessor, and the main difficulty seems to arise with accurately synchronizing these emulated processors. Haunting Grounds is one such title that proves tricky to emulate, after nearly 2 decades of being stuck on the PS2 with no remastering to be found. The game itself bleeds that PS2 survival horror vibe, with the player controlling a young woman named Fiona and her white German shepherd Huey, as they try to escape a gothic castle full of fixed camera angles. One interesting mechanic is the game's panic system, whereby extended chases with the game's stalkers and shocking events will cause Fiona to become increasingly panicked and more difficult to control. In this stage, she can even stumble and collide with objects, just like a horror movie victim tripping at the worst possible time. Of course, these visual effects, like desaturation and motion blur, that are applied in this panic mode, purportedly also seem to glitch out in the direct 3D backends used by computers. Between the need for a widescreen patch and switching OpenGL from software to hardware mode partway through, only for the game to still have visual bugs and bottleneck issues causing slowdowns, has made this hidden gem notoriously tricky to experience for yourself. To top it all off, it's become one of those special rare PS2 titles where a physical copy is going to run you at least a couple $100s if you're lucky. For many to experience Haunting Ground for themselves, their only hope is an HD remaster or some kind of re-release by Capcom. If you ask us, the amount of love and attention that was put into this project more than obligates Capcom to make sure that this work of art is accessible to posterity. But as always, that duty seems to fall to the fans. During research in the Haunting Ground, that HD remake was found, and it turns out that it was on Reddit this whole time. It turns out that one extremely dedicated fan has already spent the hundreds of hours necessary to quietly remake the entire game with HD textures, and create a version of PCSX2 which was tweaked specifically to run their HD remake project with no issues. Not every game will have access to a hyper-dedicated fan that also happens to have the skill set required to restore these old titles. Honestly, this seems too good to be true, like to the point where we thought we were being jerked around. But sure enough, one dude saved this game, and is another example of what a community can do if given the right tools.
No One Lives Forever is a first-person stealth action game that takes inspiration from movies like Austin Power and the show Get Smart. In other words, it's also a spy comedy game. In fact, in the year 2000, No One Lives Forever got several Game of the Year accolades, which is insane when you consider it had competition like the original Deus Ex, Baldur's Gate 2, and Diablo 2 by Blizzard. So, given the hype I just told you, why does no one talk about this game? We would not be surprised at all if this is the first time you're hearing about No One Lives Forever, and the long and complicated answer is licensing. No One Lives Forever was created by Monolith right before Warner Bros. Interactive Entertainment bought them out. These are the same people behind the original Fear, Shadow of Mordor, and Condemned games. No One Lives Forever 1 was published by Fox Interactive, which itself was bought out by a company called Vivendi Games, which has since merged into what we now know as Activision Blizzard. That means that the possible people who could have a stake in ownership would include 20th Century Fox, which is now owned by Disney, Warner Bros. Interactive Entertainment, and Activision Blizzard. Keep this in mind going forward. First, we must introduce Night Dive Studios.
Yeah, so what we do is we specialize in finding old IP classic games that you can't get anymore for various reasons, and then our job is to untangle that mess and bring them to a wider modern audience.
Since starting, Night Dive has gained a reputation for saving games, with such success stories including the critically acclaimed System Shock 2, I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, and the Star Wars Dark Forces remake. But for the last 10 years, they desperately wanted to give No One Lives Forever the exact same treatment, since they are passionate about the original titles. At first, Night Dive tried reaching out to Warner Bros. Interactive, who at the time believed that Activision Blizzard actually held the rights. So when they tried reaching out to Activision Blizzard, Blizzard was unsure if they owned it, since they have turned into 3 different companies since all before the time of digital storage.
Oh, hi there, Dan Amrich from Activision's community management team, the community management team of one. knowing that No One Lives Forever, which was this really funny spy spoof first-person shooter series, is so popular, I said, how come that hasn't come out? Here, the person that I normally talk to about this stuff does not believe that we currently have the rights. They've never seen it. They've never been given the permission to put that stuff on Good Old Games. They said, basically, if we had it, I would love to have been able to reissue those games. So, that leaves the question, if Activision no longer has the rights to No One Lives Forever, who does?
So then they went to 20th Century Fox, who offered to look if they paid a licensing fee, which would be refunded if they did not actually have the rights. Needless to say, this was a whole legal web where no one involved really wanted to untangle it. So instead of playing this back and forth, Night Dive in 2014 filed for a trademark on No One Lives Forever to see who disputes it, to which Warner Brothers Interactive, the same company that believed Activision Blizzard owned it, stepped up and has since shot down any idea of a remake or working with Night Dive in any form. In 2020, Stephen Kick, the head of Night Dive Studios, tweeted out this in an attempt to raise awareness and show that there was still interest in this property that was once considered Game of the Year. Unfortunately, there hasn't been any real updates since then. A dedicated team of professionals are willing to pay what it takes to bring this game back, but Warner Brothers isn't really sure if they own it, but will be damned if anyone else will be able to profit from it. What makes this really sad is that according to an interview done by PC Gamers with Ed Smith and Night Dive's head of business, Larry Cooperman, Night Dive will pretty much drop everything to bring this game back. If the heavens opened up and an agreement was dropped down that said you will not get sued for doing this, our schedules would change dramatically. No One Lives Forever 2 is actually currently playable on modern systems and has a community because the source code was leaked by the development team and the game was patched. No One Lives Forever 1 cannot be legally obtained easily, meaning that for most people, the pirated copies floating around on the internet, and as dubious as they may be, might be your only choice. From there, you'll have to figure out how to make it even run, as it's notoriously buggy on modern systems, and as of now, there is actually no way to give any company money for this game, and none of the parties involved even want to figure out who owns it, so I guess no one can play it. Personally, I'm still holding out hope, as the people behind Night Dive seem really eager to save this one.
You've managed to work on one of your favorite games of all time. What other games out there are ones that you think the world of video games should have access to that they don't?
No One Lives Forever.
Yeah. It's legal hell, that one?
That's a tough one.
Yeah.
Yeah, its rights have just been split across the four winds, and it's been a real challenge to get all the parties together to talk about, why we should do this and how we can do it. It's difficult. There's still a lot of conversations that we need to have, but I mean, I'm never gonna stop. It'll happen one way or the other.
Before you click off the video, I would just like to quickly mention that in addition to Patreon, we also have channel memberships. We use all the money from the Patreon and these memberships to directly pay for facets of the channel, including the original music, as well as additional editing so we can get these videos out faster. We already got the next video plotted out. It's going to be deadly scams that went too far, as well as exploring the weird disappearance of my friend. And like, a more real note, I would not have been able to get this far without the amazing love and support from this community. It's the validation and the fact that people keep coming back to watch these that even really motivates me to do this. There are not many jobs out there where you create something and put your heart and soul into it, and then people genuinely thank you for creating the thing that you made. In addition to the patrons, this video would not have been possible without my main editor, Chris Lotus, as well as the amazing voice talent from both my roommate and my buddy, Blame It On George. If you like what I do, then I'm pretty sure you're gonna like Blame It On George a whole heck of a lot better than me. But if you're looking for a recommendation of what to get on my channel, maybe consider checking out the cartoons that dealt with serious issues. That's a personal favorite of mine. And no matter what you do, the sun's gonna rise whether you like it or not, so you might as well be there to watch it. I've been your host, That Creepy Reading, and I wish you all a beautiful life. Have a good one.